right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the webinar today. This is the basics of arts grant writing. And let me just do a couple introductions to start, and then I will introduce our esteemed speaker. My name is Jackie Kali'ia'a. I am the manager of the public art program here at the City of Alameda. And we are also interested in building the skill set of our local artist groups here in Alameda and allow you guys the tools to get you started on creating competitive applications. It is arts is an amazing part of the world. I'm an artist myself. I love art, and also being an administrator and bringing arts resources to the community is really important. But I understand that it's not always the most user-friendly process. And so that's why I'm joined here by our esteemed speaker who will introduce us to the basics of grant writing. We are very lucky to be located here in the Bay Area. We're part of a really vibrant artist community. There are lots of arts organizations that are funding all kinds of really amazing projects throughout the Bay Area and beyond. And I think it'd be wonderful for everyone to get acquainted with what that process looks like. A couple of things before we get started. The City of Alameda launched the 2026 Cultural Arts and Arts Programming Grants last Thursday. Applications are due on March 19th at 5 p.m. And we will share the link in the chat in a little bit. But to get started, this particular presentation is all about the basics of grant writing. And then next week, February 11th, is a presentation that I'll be doing at 5 o'clock via Zoom, and that will give you an orientation on our grants process. So what is the application? What are we looking for? And also I'll be doing a Q&A. So if you're an organization that's interested in applying and have specific questions about eligibility and what types of program we're looking for, I encourage you all to attend. And I also joined here by Jack. He's our public art fellow slash part-time support here. He's been working with me for the past 2 years and is such a huge asset to our public art program here. And I think those are my only updates. Anything else that I missed, Jack, that would be important for us to mention before we get started?
I think you covered it all. It sounds good.
Okay, great. We have 14 folks here in the room. Thank you all for joining us. And again, this will all be recorded and uploaded to the YouTube page. And we're also going to email folks after with some additional resources. So for all those folks who registered, I have your email addresses. We will be following up with you. And I think, yes, that's most of it on my part. So before I start sharing the slide deck, I would like to introduce you to our esteemed speaker. We are joined by Kimberley Acebo Arteche. Kimberley is a multidisciplinary artist, educator, and cultural worker committed to re-indigenizing cultural practices and fostering community-based art. Their practice centers and interrogates Indigenous Philippine identity, and their work is on display right now at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in the exhibit named The Makibaka, A Living Legacy. So Kimberley comes to us with a wealth of knowledge from all sides of the art grant process, as an artist themselves applying for funding, as a grant panelist reviewer making funding recommendations, and as an arts administrator. They received the Master of Fine Arts from San Francisco State University and received the School of Arts Distinguished Graduate Award. Kimberley is the executive director at Brava for Women in the Arts and previously served as the co-director at the Berkeley Art Center. Everyone, please welcome Kimberley.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to have all of you on the webinar. It's always a funky thing when I don't get to see folks' faces, but I trust you have faces behind your screens. So Jackie is going to go ahead here and start sharing the screen. So again, that's my name. Next slide, please, Jackie. Okay. We don't have a chat, but we do have a Q&A. If you feel compelled to, feel free to respond in the Q&A to these questions, or just take note of it for later so that you can reflect. But one question that I want to pose to you all, what are things that you dislike or are uncomfortable with regarding grant writing? And then what do you love about or feel ease with in regards to grant writing? So what's hard? What feels easy? If you are completely green and don't know, this is your first time taking a stab at grant writing, that's also great if you want to name that, but feel free to just respond in the Q&A because it's really helpful to understand where all of you are coming from. Next slide, please. Okay, so some things that we are going to be building together. One, an understanding on how to build relationships with funders, how to keep your files and writing organized. 3, thinking about working in phases, planning your writing schedule with your capacity in mind, and then thinking about really just making sure you're taking breaks and not waiting until the last minute. Also thinking about peer and community accountability. So maybe you have a writing buddy, and then also building a grounding toolbox. Next slide, please. So some things I'm going to note this here before we get to people's responses. So a grounding toolbox is really helpful. Like this may feel like a very administrative or functional thing, but ultimately this is about money, right? And everyone has different kinds of feelings about money, right? So what I highly recommend, because, with art grants, this is supposed to help support your arts practice and bring it to a different level or put some support around a really important project that you have, right? So making sure that you're grounded before you start writing makes a huge difference, right? Or making sure that you're grounded, even if you're like, oh man, I'm so nervous, I'm anxious about this. These things will help, right? So just take some time to think about, like on your own, like maybe I listen to a meditation track for a couple of minutes. Maybe I want to take some time to journal. I do have some journal prompts at the end that might help around that, or just like reflecting, like what could this do for my practice? And then gathering tools. Okay, so one of the things that I like to do is maybe write for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and then reward myself with a cookie after that. So whatever it is to get you to be motivated around this, because I know that it is difficult, right? And then another tool that you could use is visualizing, right? So all artists are very imaginative people, right? It is exactly our imagination that puts our vision, our artistic vision into practice, into the world, right? So really visualizing what grant support can do to help. So I'm gonna just kind of take note, and I think you all have access to be able to read this, but a dislike, balancing, discussing parts of the project you're still figuring out, that will be figured out in the process of the project versus presenting the project as fully ready to go and viable. Thank you for that. We will talk about that later. I want my writing to sound professional, but not stiff. I struggle with the balance between the two. We'll also talk about this. Unfortunately, the only cookies that we can give you through the internet are internet cookies. So I'm sorry that there are no actual cookies to share with you all. One note too, finding grants that line up with my project has been hard. Yeah, definitely. Next slide, Jackie, please. Thank you. Okay, so again, journal prompts, right? So think about this. We'll also email the slides to all of you. So if you don't write all of this down right away, you will get this in your inbox, right? So think about this, like take some time to reflect. What comes up when I think about funding and sustaining my practice? For many people, that brings up a lot of anxiety. Maybe you're someone that's like, you feel very empowered when you think about that. There's a whole spectrum of that. It's really helpful to just work it out and reflect, or maybe talk to your friends about this. And then, what do these thoughts, feelings, and where do these thoughts, feelings, and emotions live in my body? And then in what ways does my body get activated when I think about funding or applying to grants? This is a bit of a somatic approach, right? Because again, like our money feelings are somatic, right? This is, for some people, this is about like survival, right? Or being like feeling legitimate as an artist, right? So it's really important to just take time to think about this. I'm not a therapist, right? So I can't process everything with y'all, but just taking a stab at these questions and reflections will probably give you a lot of insight. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are other things that help me. So another journal prompt for later that you can think about is what helps you feel grounded, connective, and expansive when those feelings from the last prompt come up in your body. And then, so in other grant writing workshops that I've done, these were some of the things that came up as suggestions from the audience. So, I mean, I have my incense going right now, right? You can maybe lighting incense makes you feel very calm, drinking tea to ground the body. I also have a playlist that helps me feel energized of like, oh yeah, like I'm not gonna listen to sad music when I'm writing my grant application. I wanna listen to uplifting music. So maybe that's helpful. Again, we talked about cookies. And then co-writing with a friend to make sure that you don't feel isolated, right? Someone that can help be moral support or be like a body double. Maybe you just need someone to kind of babysit you and make sure that you're trying to get through it, right? Okay, great. So take some time to think about that. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the actual technical skills around grant writing. So I want y'all to kind of think about like, what do I need to ground and root this in my artistic practice? And so now we're switching into the kind of mechanics around this. Next slide, please. Okay. So the first thing is thinking about building positive relationships with funders, right? So in the Bay Area, we're very lucky that when there is capacity, the program specialists or the program managers really love hearing from applicants, from people who have been coming to different events, right? So one of the things that you want to make sure is, and this was noted in the chat, like before reaching out to a funder, make sure you're researching their mission, their values, and their funding priorities. What does that look like? Reading through the program guidelines, reading through the program's eligibilities. And then also, if that funder has the information available online, that means looking at the funder's previously awarded projects, right? So maybe hypothetically, I have a project that is about making 20-foot chocolate chip cookies as a public art sculpture. So hypothetical, right? And I'm looking through that funder's previously funded projects, and I don't see anything that talks about like public sculpture. Maybe that grant isn't a right fit, right? So you want to look at who they've funded in the past to get an idea of what they love and what they're currently supporting. The next thing is to be clear and concise. So this is kind of touching on the note about writing, right? So when presenting your proposal, be clear and concise in your communication, and make sure, make sure that your proposal aligns with the funder's priorities and addresses their specific concerns. 3, build a relationship over time. So know that it takes time to build a relationship. Follow up with funders after submitting your proposal and stay in touch over time. This was a statistic, and I want to say it might have been from 2018, from an article. And I haven't been able to go back and find that article. I don't think it's online anymore. But there is a really amazing Bay Area artist. Her name is Jennifer Wofford, and she wrote an article about the struggles of writing applications and submitting applications and being rejected over and over and over again. She took very specific details on like what she got admitted to, what she got funded, and what she got rejected. And the statistic was actually, say you applied to 100 things, you get 15 back. So actually, it might sound a little bit bleak, but just know that if you are rejected the first couple times applying to something, that's actually quite normal, right? So just know that it does take some time to build these skills up. 4, be transparent with funders about your goals. So maybe you're an individual artist, but I do want you to start thinking about yourself as an organization. So maybe it's just you and you're creating an arts festival. Like your organization may just be you, but under that, there's the administrator, there's the artist, there's the marketing person, there's the volunteer coordinator, right? So start to think about like not just me as an artist, but as an organization, like, and me as an entity that's trying to put on or produce these kinds of projects. What it actually is my goal? What am I having trouble with, and what has actually been successful? And then last, of course, after receiving funding, make sure you express your gratitude to the funder. And that just, it doesn't have to be anything extravagant, but an email of saying like, wow, I've applied to this a couple times and I'm like really grateful for the support. So feel free to put any questions in the chat about just like building a relationship. One thing that I'll also note is that program officers most likely aren't the ones that are making decisions on whether you're getting funding or not. So if you reach out to the funder and say like, hey, I've read your mission, I've read your program goals, I feel like this is a good fit. And then you kind of explain like what's going on, like what your idea is. You explain to them what your challenges and successes are. That program officer often has a little bit more context and a little bit more understanding of what's going on with you, and may be able to present that kind of that background information when the panels are happening. This happened actually quite often when I was on a previous panel, and the program officer, again, was not a voting person, but shared a lot of context in the past of like, hey, this organization is going through a leadership transition, so that may be why their budget looks this way, or that may be why their programming looks this way. So being transparent about what's going on with you and or your organization really does help a lot. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now we're talking about grant writing style, right? So Katie, I'm seeing your note that you want your writing to sound professional, but not stiff. And so we're gonna clarify this. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are your 2 goals as an applicant. Your goal is to communicate to the funder that you are equipped to be successful in carrying out your project, and that your project is actually exciting and brings something new, or it brings something relevant to the community, right? So when you're thinking about that lens, next slide, please, you have to make sure that your application is super clear, concise, persuasive, organized, and specific, right? So what does this mean? When you're writing your grant proposals, this isn't an artistic take, right? This is not your prose. This is not poetry. This is not an artistic analysis of what you're doing. You are saying, hey, I'm going to do this within this amount of time with this much resources, and we're going to reach out to this kind of community, right? So your language should be clear, simple, free of jargon, and you want to avoid using any technical terms that may confuse or overwhelm the reader, because the reader may not always be someone within your very specific discipline or field. The second thing on being concise, they should be to the point. Every sentence should serve a purpose and contribute to the overall message, right? So there's oftentimes, and from my understanding, this Alameda's grant doesn't, it has a suggested word count, but it doesn't kind of cut you off at a certain point. So even when there is a suggested word count, you still want to be thoughtful to have that be your goal, right? So say the word count is 500 and you went on for 5,000 words. That is just like a lot of extra stuff that and kind of information that the grant reader has to sift through when making their decision. So the more concise and to the point that you can be, the more clear it is for the grant reader to be able to make that decision. Of course, it should be persuasive, right? So be really thoughtful about the tone and language. One of the things that is a great tip is, if you see on the grant program, like there's an emphasis in community, right? You see the word community over and over and over again. You're probably going to want to make sure community is somewhere in your project, right? So that would be really difficult to say, hypothetically, it's a community arts grant, but then you're asking for funding so that you can stay in your studio and not really share it with the community, right? So in order to be persuasive, one really great tip, right? It's just like writing a resume. You want to look at that org's values and vision and what their priorities are within that program or for the foundation or for that granting body, and be able to incorporate those words into your application. Be organized, right? So structure your grant in a logical manner, right? Introduction, project specifics, project details, a timeline, and then a closing, right? It's very basic writing structure. And then also you want to be specific in terms of the goals and objectives of the project, as well as the outcomes that are expected, right? So this will help the funder understand how their investment will be used and the impact that it will have. So what does this all mean? I have an example here. Jackie, could you skip to the next slide, please? Okay, So this is an example. Our project is a community-based arts initiative that will bring people together through creative expression. We believe art is powerful and can help heal communities, especially during difficult times. This project will include workshops, events, and collaborations with local artists. The goal is to uplift voices that are often unheard and create space for connection and creativity. We are excited about the potential impact of this work and believe it will benefit many people in the community. We are seeking funding to support materials, artist fees, and other project costs. This project aligns with our mission and values and will help us continue doing meaningful work in our community, right? So in terms of the writing style, it's very clear, right? The first paragraph kind of hits on a lot of feelings. But what is wrong here, right? It's a little bit vague, right? So when we say, like, what is the last sentence on paragraph 1, we believe it will benefit many people in the community, right? So even saying many people, that's still a little bit vague, right? There's no clear scope, there's no timeline, there's no audience, right? And there's no evidence of readiness or specificity, right? Again, your goal is to give the granting body confidence that you can pull off what you say you're going to pull off, right? So even some details of like, oh, I have experience of this many years doing event that's similar. This project would give me an opportunity to take some risks, and I feel confident because I have X, Y, and Z resources or partners that will be helping me take this project to the next level, right? Going back to this specific example, it hits a lot of the feelings, but it also could describe almost any project, right? Jackie, next slide, please. This is what specificity and clarity and conciseness can do, right? So this project is a 6-week community art workshop series serving 30 diverse emerging artists in Alameda. Led by 3 paid teaching artists, the program provides hands-on skill building, peer exchange, and a public sharing designed to strengthen artistic practice and community connection. Participants will meet once weekly for 2 hours at a neighborhood art space, engaging in facilitated workshops, focused on creative development, storytelling, and collaboration. The project concludes with a free public showcase attended by an estimated 120 community members, creating a low barrier opportunity for artists to share their work and connect with new audiences. Funding will support artist stipends, materials, space rental, and accessibility costs, ensuring artists are compensated fairly and participants can engage fully. This project builds on our organization's 5-year history of delivering community-rooted arts programming and directly advances our goal of increasing access to paid opportunities for diverse emerging artists in Alameda, right? So why is this strong? There's a very clear scope. So the 4 W's: who, what, where, and when. I think the only thing that is like not super specific is the where. So in this example, it says neighborhood art space, right? So in those, I think the note in the Q&A is like things that will be figured out in the process of the project. You can always say at a neighborhood art space, venue to be determined, right? And then if there is a section that says, that asks for your timeline, that's when you're going to want to say, we don't have the venue confirmed yet, but in March, we're going to have this confirmed, right? The other thing that this sample is really strong with is specific numbers and activities, right? So 30 diverse emerging artists, 3 paid teaching artists. We're meeting once weekly for 2 hours, right? 1 free public showcase, 120 community members, right? And then the budget priorities do match the narrative, right? So it talks about strengthening artistic community and connection. And so this note here in the 3rd paragraph says, funding will support artist stipends, materials, space rental, and accessibility, right? So the things that you say in terms of like this last sentence on programming directly advances our goal of increasing access to paid creative opportunities for XYZ. You want those values to be reflected within your budget and your budget notes. It shows readiness and not just the intention, because they also say like, you know, we've been doing this for 5 years. Next slide, please. This slide just kind of reiterates what I just said, but the one thing that I want you to note is like strong narratives don't try to sound impressive. They are written to be understood clearly, right? So the big thing that you want to do is make sure that your narrative and your matching budget can encompass what you can actually pull off and is not just kind of speaking in platitudes because you want it to be competitive. Most grant panelists are going to know the difference of like, oh, actually, that feels like such a grand scale compared to what we've seen them done in the past. Like, do they really have the capacity to be able to do that, right? So really think like simple is great, and being clear about what you're gonna get done and have that written very with language that people can understand is gonna be really key here. Feel free to continue to add questions in the chat. There haven't, or in the Q&A, there haven't been any new questions since then. But let's move on to the next slide, please, Jackie. So we'll talk about budgets. Next slide. Some tips if it's your first time crafting a grant budget. One, start with what you know is needed. So list the real costs: artist pay, materials, space, time. The biggest thing you cannot forget is to pay yourself for all of your work. Even if you know that you can't afford like your actual rate, you want that represented. So say I'm doing like 100 hours of work and I want to pay myself $25 for all of those hours. So that's like a $2,500 stipend to me for putting all of it together. But maybe I know that like I want to redirect some of those funds to the venue rental or some other things. You can just like note that like this honoraria, maybe I want to put my honoraria for myself at $1,500 and redirect some of those other costs to the actual needs to do the work well. Just don't underpay yourself, right? Like people, like the grant panelists are really paying attention to when we're not honoring our own labor, right? So that kind of goes back to the question of like making sure that your project is proportionate to the scale that you want to pull off, right? Okay. To anchor the budget in your capacity, design a project that you can realistically manage. Again, talking about scalability, a smaller complete budget is stronger than an ambitious one you can't sustain. We just talked about that. And then 3, check alignment between budget and story. Your narrative and your numbers should reinforce each other. If you describe care, collaboration, or accessibility, the budget should reflect that, right? So what does that mean? Like we want to talk about caring for the community. Maybe that means like having snacks at your meeting. If you talk about accessibility, maybe that means making sure that you note in your application that you will be having your meetings or your workshops at a building that has ramps, that has bathrooms, that is on a bus line, that is easy to get to, right? Or maybe you're working with the hard of hearing community, maybe you want a sign language interpreter, right? So those values, make sure that that is reflected in your budget as well. Okay, so I am seeing some notes here. Finding grants that line up with my project has been hard. Maybe we can come back to that if there's a very specific question around that. And then for where and when realistically my performances won't happen without the grant money. So do you say that or just say TBD? For where and when, this is where, so say for example, I want to have my dance performance at Dance Mission. Maybe that means you've already contacted their operations staff and you've gotten a quote, and it's like kind of preparing all of that information. So just say, you could say something like, we've been in communication about rental. Confirmation is to be determined by the results of, by the outcomes of this grant, right? So you can say that, but you want to make sure that you actually have some of those plans and those details lined up. So it's not just like, well, I'm not going to ask anybody until I actually get the money. You want to do that work ahead, and people want to know that you can plan and you have some of those connections or relationships in place for when the funding does come in. Next slide, please. And then some common budget mistakes, right? We mentioned this earlier: underpaying or forgetting to pay your artists and yourself. 2, building the project first and then forcing the budget to fit, right? So this is kind of like a chicken and egg thing, right? So maybe we're dreaming about like, so for example, one grant application may say that the max is $15,000, but often that granting panel will maybe fund you anywhere between 10 and 12,500, right? So you want to make sure that your budget is a little bit scalable. Your budget and your project is a little bit scalable. So don't promise that you're going to do 20 performances when actually it's more realistic for you to build a project around 2 performances, right? So just thinking about like writing the narrative and then writing the budget and then thinking about like, oh, that actually doesn't fit. Maybe I should reduce it from 4 events to 2 events and then make sure that it's actually something that's manageable, right? 3, mismatch between the narrative and the numbers, kind of the same thing, right? Ignoring capacity and coordination costs, right? You want to make sure anytime that there is space for you to add in indirect costs, you want to max that out, right? Because a lot of times we underestimate our capacity, we underestimate how much it costs for us to be able to do this work, how much it costs to be able to coordinate with another agency or another collaborator, right? So make sure that that is reflected in your budget. Forgetting to balance income and expenses, right? So that's a really simple one. Maybe your income is $15,000, but your project actually costs $20,000. You need to make sure that that's balanced. And then 6, trying to make the budget look impressive instead of honest, right? So be realistic, be smart about it. Yeah. I saw that question come in. We'll come to that at the end. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're just talking about organizing the grant writing process, right? 1, make sure that's organized. So I personally use Google Docs. I'm not sure what else is out there. Maybe people use Notion or different things. But this is my process. I use Google Docs. I share it with my collaborator. I'll tag them. We'll tag each other back and forth where their writing and input is needed. Making sure that your files are labeled clearly. This helps. I don't even need to reiterate that. Make a checklist for all support documents needed for submission. So typically you'll need work samples, you'll need a budget, maybe you need an agreement with your fiscal sponsor, maybe you need a letter of recommendation. You want to make a checklist at the very top of your Google Doc where you're going to work on your notes to make sure that you're looking for all of these things. And I'm actually going to email all of you a grant narrative template that I use to kind of keep everything like visually organized, and that should help a whole lot, but you will get that in your email inbox. Next slide, please. So you're going to want to work in phases. So 1, we talked about the discovery phase. So researching the agency or funder, understanding the grant program priorities, sorry, like slipping on my words. And then 2, organizing. So organize a folder and copy all of the questions into a Google Doc. So I highly recommend referencing the grant application guide if that is provided. Most of the time it is provided. And then I also log into their application portal just to like double check and make sure I know how to navigate that portal. You don't want to use that application, the grant application guide, and then not look at the grant portal until the day it's due, and then you don't know where to submit your things. So I do that all at the beginning to make sure that I'm prepared. For me, it's kind of like doing my Google Maps, like looking at my my route ahead of time. 2, make a checklist that includes all of your required documents and work samples. My hot tip here is compile your required documents earlier in the process so that you're not tracking down files or signatures last minute, right? So I prepare all of my work samples. I make sure that I'm asking for my letters of recommendation or reference letters earlier, so that I don't have to think about it later, because it's happened so many times where, you know, people are like, oh, I need this letter, it's due today. We don't want you to be in that place, right? And then in this first phase of making sure that I'm copying all of the questions into my Google document, I use this time to understand what the application is looking for and to take note of keywords or values that are used throughout the application, right? So maybe hypothetically, a grant is for youth. You want to make sure that you're really addressing the youth component in your narrative, right? So that just kind of, it's like reading the index before you actually start working on it. Next slide, please. 3, outline, right? So this is old school. It's like writing a paper in high school. So I don't start writing the narrative in full narrative form. I start with an outline, right? So if you've written for grants in the past, you want to copy and paste anything into your Google Doc that feels applicable. And then I also just like, oh, maybe my bullet points or my outline form is like community project, 5 workshops, the list of artists that I want to work with, my goals of reaching out to a new community, making sure that we can learn how to knit together, right? So I just do an outline, very basic bullet point format to write in key highlights and my project goals. And then here, that third point is use the SMART acronym as a guide. So make sure that it's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and then timely. Often in other, in other grant applications, a lot of times if there's like multiple cycles, so for example, CCI, the Center for Cultural Innovation, has a quick grant. They have quick grants that go out every month. And so maybe there's something that I'm looking at for August, but I'm applying all the way in January. Likely the funding panel might reject that because you still have a lot of time. So you can either just kind of continue to reapply every month and use that same application until it gets funded, or maybe just like wait and apply in June instead of January for something that's in August. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, we're in this next phase. So for me, I write the outline. I don't start writing my first draft yet. I go take a nap. I go do something fun. I, have dinner. I sleep on it so that things can marinate and really like get in my brain. And then I go into my first draft. I use my notes and my outlines to start creating an organized narrative and paragraph responses. 2 things. Bullet points may be very appropriate for your responses. Bullet points are great. They keep things organized. I love seeing bullet points in grant applications. And then using tools like a thesaurus or Google search or whatever search search engines you use when you're feeling stuck, right? Next slide, please. And then generally, that drafting phase may take me like the longest because I want to marinate. I'll take a break. Maybe I'll like clean my apartment or do some gardening. And then I'll, go back and forth between taking breaks and my drafting process. And then when I'm ready to submit, you always want to double check your work, ensure that the required documents are uploaded, and then use your rituals and tools to be in a grounded and expansive place when you submit, right? Because if you're nervous, and for full transparency, I'm on the woo-woo end, right? But if you're really nervous when you submit, like that energy is gonna kind of like sit with you. It's gonna linger, right? So maybe eat a cookie, drink some tea, take a deep breath. You don't want to be in a frazzled state when you submit, because then you're just gonna think about like, oh, I'm worried, like, when am I going to find out? Did I get it, right? You want to be grounded when you hit submit. So, and then I love to take a moment to visualize expansion and growth for my practice and for my projects when I hit that submit button. And then I go eat a cookie because that's a lot of hard work. It's kind of like the unseen, unpaid labor of writing the grant application. So you deserve a treat after submitting your grant application. Next slide, please. So, for example, this is like how I plan out my capacity, right? So, the first phase, I'll organize and gather my documents. Then I'll, work on my outline. I'll black out days that I know I have stuff going on. So maybe that third week is kind of, rehearsal and tech week for a performance. And realistically, I'm not going to be writing a grant when I'm at tech rehearsal. That's going to be terrible for me personally, right? And then I'm also going to put in what days I'm going to co-work with my friend, what days I can't, work on things. So you really want to like color code if that helps you, or just think like 3 or 4 weeks in advance. And then my hot tip here is to submit 2 days before the deadline. Why is this? Because on the day of the deadline, chances are more people have waited till the last minute to submit. So a lot of times you'll see that the grant portal is kind of glitchy. Everyone's asking questions of the grant officers, the program officers, and maybe they just don't get to your question in time. So you want to give yourself 2 or 3 days in advance to target that date, so that if you do have an issue, you're already 3 days in advance. You can ask that question, get a prompt response, and then you don't even think about it, right? Like, again, this is making sure that you're not completely stressed at the end of this. Next slide, please. Okay, and then there's well, what if I just found out about this grant and it's due next week? These are the questions that I ask myself to make sure that I'm actually aware of my resources. So 1, do I have existing writing or language that is applicable to this project or proposal that I'm submitting, right? So if it's kind of a copy and paste to the next one, then sure, let's do that. B, do I have other deadlines that overlap, right? So maybe like I have something going on at work or school that will just make it terror to try to apply for this. Maybe you want to save that stress, right? Next one is, do I have accountability buddies or writing support from community members who can help me achieve my deadline, right? Maybe you have a friend that loves pulling all-nighters. Maybe that is you. That's not me, but maybe someone can really help motivate that along. And then the last one is, can I plan writing sessions or submission parties with my peers? This is one of the things that I really love to do. Maybe me and all of my friends are submitting for the same application. And then as we are hitting that submit button, we, eat a pizza, eat some cake, pie, spaghetti, whatever it is that feels like you can do this together with your friends. And then also just that note that it's totally wait until next year's round to apply, because that means you are 1 year ahead of next year's application. You can really be thoughtful and take your time, because you don't want to submit a half thought out application, right? So just for me, save yourself the stress. Don't put yourself through it. If you are someone who loves like the stress and fear of that, then like great for you, more power to you. But these are, again, generally, these are the kind of questions that I think about if, I've come to it like a little bit last minute and I really just like want to check in with myself. Next slide, please. Okay, and then these are some of the things that I want you to take some time to think about, right? Like, I want you to think about an affirmation, right? So with a piece of paper, write an affirmation that you like to hold for your grant writing and application process, right? So maybe the affirmation is, I want to submit my grants on time. Maybe the affirmation is, I just want to submit my first one. Maybe the affirmation is, I want to feel good about my writing. I want to feel clear and I want to feel that my writing is understood. I want to have a budget that makes a lot of sense, right? So take your time to really think about that and envision that ahead of time. Next slide, please. Or was it the last one? I think there's one more slide, no?
Sorry, Kim, I'm not sure why it's not advancing. Let me try to troubleshoot here.
Oh, no, I think that is the last one.
Is it the last one? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
that's the last one.
'Cause I was clicking forward and it wasn't doing anything.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like we can take the slides off, and so we're gonna go into the Q&A here. So we have a question. For a small group that is rebuilding our financial stability with a new fiscal sponsor and no funding, how can we show that we have capacity to start fresh and be responsible? So a lot of times this means paying for it out of your own pocket, right? So that is okay. And you just kind of want to get creative about how you say that. Like, right? So maybe in the budget that, when you have your budget, the budget template, and I think, in the next workshop that is like specifically about this application, Jackie will go over what that actually looks like. But often in grant budget templates, they'll say like, what funding sources do you have confirmed, what is kind of pending, right? So it's like, what are your other sources of funding outside of this grant application that you are applying to, right? So it is totally okay to say, self-contributed, right? So you just kind of want to finesse how exactly you say it instead of saying out of my own pocket, right? So you can say, yeah, self-contributed or different things, right? If there's like a kind of follow-up to that, feel free to put that in the Q&A again. But I think, it's like, start small, like, what your capacity is. And one of the other things is like, you want to make sure that you have diverse revenue. This is kind of more an intermediate grant tip, but you want to, like, when you're applying to different funders, you want to have multiple sources of revenue. To also note that you are really dedicated to this project. Maybe the project is already in progress, and maybe some crowdfunding or maybe some individual donations are going to get that started, or maybe even thinking about earned revenue, right? So maybe it's like ticket prices. You want to put that in there to make sure that you're not only relying on that project to get it done. It does feel like a really terrible chicken and egg thing of like, well, if I don't have this funding, then I can't do it. But I need the funding to really start moving on this project, right? So it's kind of an odd it's kind of an odd conundrum, and I'll just like acknowledge that it's like not the most accessible, but you just kind of want to be thoughtful about like, well, where can people contribute? You can also note like volunteer hours, right? Maybe you can get some like in-kind donations for different things. So making sure that you're really thoughtful about all of those different kinds of ways that you or your community or different people, partners, or organizations can contribute will make a difference in really just making it look like that you're prepared, or not making it look like, but being prepared for your project, right? Okay, there's a great question about finding a fiscal sponsor. This really depends on what you're doing. The two biggest fiscal sponsored programs in the Bay Area, fiscal sponsorship programs, are Independent Arts and Media. They are really great. And then there's Intersection for the Arts. I would just make sure that you're double checking like what their application process is. I don't know off the top of my head if they've updated that process, or if there's like a kind of window of time for when they're accepting new fiscally sponsored projects. But I would look there first. And there's also a website where I think it's like fiscal, if you just Google fiscal sponsorship, there is one, actually it's the same org that that writes this book, Fiscal Sponsorship, they also have a website that has like the biggest database of all of this fiscal sponsors across the US. So definitely like take a look online and see what's available. But my two kind of uh, go-to recommendations are Intersection for the Arts and Independent Arts and Media. They're pretty well organized. You get all of your financial reports, you get your communication right away. Me personally, I throughout the years I've had different fiscal sponsorships with different organizations over time. So for example, I do a lot of projects within the Asian Pacific American community. So I am fiscally sponsored with Kearney Street Workshop because that is an appropriate partner. Like that organization is relevant to the work that I'm doing, right? So kind of think about like sometimes there's an advantage to partner with a specific organization to do their fiscal sponsorship. But in general, for artists, especially first-time artists, I would point you to IAM or Intersection for the Arts. And I also know that that got answered in the chat, so thank you, Jackie and Jack. Okay, so question. Most artists work on their own in isolation. What is your advice to an artist who is not affiliated with the group? I think I need a little bit more details with that. What is it that you need a group for? Because that could be answered in like many different ways. So I think I need a little bit more information around that. Yeah. Jackie, can we get a check on like how much more time we have for Q&A?
Yeah. We are wrapping at
Okay.
6:15.
Okay.
So if there's any other questions, and I think if I click answer live, I believe they can jump in and ask the question, this person about the isolate. Let me see if that works. Okay, I don't think that works. I'm sorry about that. I'm getting used to the webinar feature of Zoom tonight. Thanks for your patience, everybody. But I just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask Kimberly any questions. I think there's a lot of great answers there about writing style. That was definitely touched on already. Fiscal sponsorship was touched on. Rashid says thank you. And then there's all these questions appear to have been answered. So I want to respect everyone's time and I appreciate you hanging out with us. I know it's late. It's almost dinner time. So if you have any other questions, please ask them now. And as I shared earlier, we're going to upload this recording and send you an email with several resources. Kimberly shared they're going to send some writing prompts and also a narrative prompt. And then I will also share those links to the fiscal sponsors that were recommended tonight.
Okay, we have a great question. We're going to answer it right now. What's the best way to get updates on upcoming grants, right? There's many different newsletters that are out there that are really great. The kind of like if you're looking nationally, I would look up Creative Capital. It's spelled phonetically the regular way. They have a really great newsletter for artists that talks about opportunities for grants and residencies all across the US. The best way is also, so this is one really great tip. The city of Oakland, the Oakland Library has access. You can get access to the foundation directory, and because typically the foundation directory costs like $16,000 a year to have. So this is something that really advanced development professionals have, but we have access to it locally. And so the foundation directory is a great way where you can like log in online and just do a search of like grants for public art, grants for dance, right? It's a really great free and accessible prospecting tool for you to be able to look up like, oh, maybe there's actually this funder in the South Bay that also like kind of reaches out over here to Alameda or other parts of the Bay Area, and maybe I want to just like get on their newsletter, right? So using that foundation directory access locally, I think other also like UC Berkeley, some of the other universities have access to it through their libraries as well. But please check that out. It's a really great resource. It's free. You just have to access it on site from the library. Okay, so I'm trying to understand this question. Is there space in a grant application for funding for money already spent, or is it only for future? Yeah, i.e. it was this much amount of money to launch the show, but now looking at grants and performances, it seems to only be for current and upcoming expenses. Right, so that is a great question. Very typically, you will see organizations, dance companies, different kinds of companies submit a budget that is for their whole project, right? So maybe the whole project is, we're doing some performances in Oakland, and then we're doing some performances in San Francisco, and there's one big culminating event in Alameda, right? Hypothetical. That can, with a full project budget, you can itemize like what this grant would be for. So maybe there's a grant application, it's $5,000. You can note that within the project that this is going to go to these 3 artists and it'll pay for this, right? So I think you can think about like what is the scope of the whole project and what can this funding actually fit as a puzzle piece within that, right? So the only thing that I'll note, and I don't know if this is what was kind of implied in your question, of money that's already spent, you can't double dip. You can't double dip. So if you say for like phase 1, I did my project in Oakland, I did my 3 performances, you can't get funding to pay yourself more for stuff that's already happened, right? You can't apply for a grant to pay yourself for something that you've already gotten complete funding for, right? So if you mean funding for money that's already spent, maybe like it was out of your own pocket, that would count. There's ways that you can kind of really be clear about your timeline. So maybe like you out of your own pocket, like bought materials. A lot of times that's kind of okay. You can get like creative about it, but just one really important thing to note, like you can't double dip on funding. You can't pay yourself back for things that you already got that has already happened. So it does have to be upcoming. But in terms of like the whole project scope, like you can say, we got this funding to do the launch, right? But then I want to have it continue in these other theaters, then you can get funding for that. Oh, hopefully that makes sense.
Can I jump in on that, Kimberly,
Yeah,
if you don't mind?
yeah.
Okay. Hi, this is Jackie. I introduced myself at the top, so if you're just I wanted to jump on to address this. So, for example, a majority of programs are funding future activities. So, for example, the City of Alameda Cultural Arts Grants Program is for events happening starting fiscal year 26 to 27. So starting July 1st, 2026. So if you were to apply for something that's already been done, that would not be eligible. And so lots of grant programs are structured around a specific timeline when those funds are being utilized. So for the grants that I have applied for in the past, there's no sort of reimbursements for previously spent funds. It's always, for the most part, future activities. There probably is in that foundation book a grant program that does something other than that. But for the most part, a lot of the cultural arts grants in the Bay Area are for activities that are happening in the future. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks for that clarity, Jackie. Okay. Yes, finding grants for capital projects, that is very specific. That's a realm of work that I haven't been able to kind of figure out or crack the code on. This program is specifically like arts and culture, so events and exhibitions, right? Capital projects are a little bit different. The organization that I would point you to is Community Vision. So communityvision.org, I'm pretty sure, is their website, and they probably have the most resources. But capital work is a very different process because that also overlaps with real estate readiness, and they have very different answers, or very different guidelines. And that's a very different kind of beast of funding as opposed to the arts and culture work that we're doing. Any other questions? We have like 5 more minutes.
Okay, well, I'm gonna jump on quickly and just everybody, please give us a virtual round of applause for Kimberly in this incredibly helpful workshop. I learned a lot also, and I've been grant writing for over 6 years now, so it was very helpful. We've got another question here in the chat. Oh, there was a hand that was raised.
I'll answer that question. Okay, the Bay Area is very saturated in cultural work. How can I ensure my application stands out from other groups doing similar work? Yeah, this is a really great question. And also, so cultural work, and I'm also like tying some pieces together because I think I know who this person is, right? You also really want to think about like who founded your organization? What are the values of the founders as opposed to the other orgs that are doing similar things, right? So really thinking about like in terms of cultural work, like legacy is a really important thing to kind of uplift in your applications. It's like, who are the choreographers or who are the culture bearers or culture masters that we are uplifting specifically from in the work that we're doing, right? So, for example, hula, so many incredible, amazing halaus out there. And they are led by very specific leaders because they come from very specific lineages, right? And they all have very distinct approaches to their storytelling, approaches to their choreography, right? So that is really like, you have to kind of think about your founders or your teachers or your kumu as like the person that really grounds the values with which you approach the cultural work, right? Because when it's like, oh, there's so many, like all of the different halaus have been able to kind of distinguish themselves from each other because of like the school or the lineage that they come from. So hopefully that answers that question. Jackie, do I have time?
I think we're just about to wrap up now. So again, thank you so much to Kimberly for this wealth of knowledge. We will be following up with everybody with the additional resources. And oh, we've got a lot of folks. Feel free to jump in and say thank you to Kim. Show Kim some love. And also again, we're having a webinar next week, February 11th at 5 o'clock. That's where I'll be going into the specifics of the City of Alameda's cultural arts grants process. But again, all of this is everything that Kimberly shared today applies to ours as well, being specific, being clear, being concise, being organized. All of that will help your application be competitive because the reality is there's a lot of amazing art out there in this world. And unfortunately, there's not enough funding for everybody. And so, really giving yourself the time to think through how you're going to be applying and to consider why now, all of these things make it unique and specific and highlight why you either yourself as an individual or your arts organization should be getting funded, so again, thank you so much to Kimberly. We're going to wrap it up now. Thank you all for joining. and we'll be in touch over email. Thank you to my co-pilot, Jack, as well. And if you have any questions, I'll be sending an email and you can follow up with me directly. The deadline for the 2026 Cultural Arts application is March 19th at 5 p.m. All right. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.